So the economic survey paints a rather rosy picture. I want to bring in Javed Ansari, our executive editor. Also want to bring in senior associate editor of Business Today, Shweta Punj. She joins me in the studio. Javed, take us through the highlights of the economic survey.
Look, it points to an 8% growth, and more importantly, from the political point of view, it says we have the mandate for reforms, and therefore the stage is now set for big bang reforms. Tomorrow, Mr. Arun Jaitley, the Finance Minister, will unveil his second budget before the nation. And all eyes will be on him on whether he bites the bullet and decides to go in for those big bang reforms. Reform number 2, that follows what Mr. Manmohan Singh did in the early 90s. So all eyes will be on Mr. Jaitley, and also on India's political class, whether they will allow him to carry out these reforms. It's one thing to announce measures, it's quite another to get legislative sanction. So the onus will also be on India's parliamentarians on whether they put their seal of approval on it.
Stay with me for a moment, Javed. Shweta, when we look at the economic survey, GDP growth seen between 8.1 to 8.5% as against 7.4%. Now, is this actually doable, or are we painting a rather rosy picture?
Gaurav, I have to agree with you that, if the expectations weren't high enough from the finance minister, I mean, they have really set the stage for themselves. We are looking at a very optimistic, growth estimate. And when we talk about 8% growth, we are talking about millions of jobs, and that is at the core, or that should be at the core of this budget.
Yes.
So yes, it's a very optimistic projection, and primarily because the base year has been revised. But the way the GDP has been calculated has been questioned by economists across the world. So India will have to do a lot of convincing, to say that, our numbers were calculated in a very fair, transparent manner, because we have to remember that China has also put out these very encouraging and very optimistic growth numbers.
Which the world isn't really
Which
buying.
the world does not really buy into,
Yes.
because they keep their methodology, it's not very transparently done. So we need to come out and convince the world now that,
Yes.
okay, we are genuinely going to grow at over 8%. Because let me tell you, in the last 7 months, yes, this government came in with very high expectations. There was a lot of optimism, but none of that is really translated into investments on the ground.
Yes.
And even now, people want to come in and maybe buy a business, which is what we have seen. They don't want to come and set up businesses. So that's a big drawback. And yes, this government is trying to address those issues, and ease of doing business is one of the key issues that this government is trying to address. But it remains to be seen how much of that really translates into real money on the ground, because everybody...
The Prime Minister has travelled across 7 seas. He's travelled extensively. He said, come, make in India, build in India. We are open for business. There will be ease of business. All of that he said in Japan. He said that in the United States. He said that in Australia. He said that during the BRICS summit. So he's been painting a rosy picture. But is there actually ease of business on ground? And Javed, as far as the left is concerned, Sitaram Yechuri is saying this is just manipulating numbers, this is juggling numbers, this isn't the true picture that the finance minister is presenting. So do we see the opposition come for that growth story, come together for that growth story, or will they actually see this as a sellout, as the left seems to indicate, especially when it comes to land?
Look, on the land is a different question. On the land, those who first initiated the reforms there's difference of opinion. So that aside, the opposition will oppose. Their mandate is to oppose, they believe, and they will continue to do so. Now the big question is whether these numbers have been fudged, or as to put it in Mr. Sitaram Yechuri's words, whether there's a jugglery of numbers. Well, if indeed that is the case, and Mr. Jaitley cannot come up with the goods, like my colleague Shweta was saying, that this translates into millions of jobs, and if at the end of the year these do not translate into millions of jobs, then the government will have one hell of a task, because that is they've raised expectations, they've belied a lot of them, and if they now cannot deliver, then the political price will be there will be a huge political price to pay for this.
Okay. Now, as far as the subsidies are concerned, Shweta, the government appears very keen that, when they talk about the JAM Trinity, Jan Dhan Yojana, Aadhaar and mobile numbers, and they're saying that we want targeted subsidies so that the subsidy reaches the actual target and is not frittered away the way it was in the past.
Right.
When you look at the economic survey, will this government go ahead with the big bang reforms, or after Delhi, perhaps has the government lost its nerve?
So, Gaurav, absolutely. After Delhi, we thought that this government might go easy, but clearly they are saying that we are going to come out and we are going to announce big bang reforms. What are these reforms that we are talking about? If you look at the reforms that the economic survey talks about, one of the most prominent ones is the Jan Dhan Yojana. Now, the Jan Dhan Yojana, what is it doing? It's making sure that everybody has a bank account, something that Narega also tried to do.
Yes.
So this is something that has been done in the past. However, the real game changer here would be that these accounts don't lie dormant.
Yes.
Because what happens is that you open a bank account and then there is money that's coming in, but there are people in the villages who don't want to travel for 20-30 kilometers to take out 500 rupees. It's just bad return on investment for them.
Yes.
So that would be the real game changer. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with the Jan Dhan Yojana. Second, subsidies. Now that's been a very contentious issue, and third would be the taxation bit, which I'll come to later. But subsidies, now that's the holy cow of politics and economics.
Yes.
Mr. Chidambaram increased the subsidy budget. I mean, the spends on Narega were increased by some over 100% at a time when the economy was doing very decently in 2009, and that proved to be a drag later. So this government has constantly said that we want very targeted subsidies and plugging of leakages.
And that is where JAM plays an important role.
That is where Jan Dhan plays a very important role. It's good news that they've not done away with Aadhaar, because Aadhaar is very integral to this entire thing. Also, will they look at fertilizer subsidies? Will they touch agriculture subsidies? Will they look at widening the tax base? That's where the real reform comes in, because even now, agriculture continues to be outside the tax net, and we are talking about, income. We're talking about a whole lot of money that is not getting taxed at the moment, and that's a legacy that we are bearing the burden of. So, will this government expand the tax net? That's one of the biggest reforms that I'll be watching out for tomorrow.
All eyes on Arun Jaitley's Big Bang reforms budget. That remains our top focus story. For the moment, Shweta Punj and Javed Ansari, many thanks for joining me.